Hi, I'm Natalie Needham, your host. Welcome back. Heart disease is still the number one killer in the world, and today's guest thinks we've been asking the wrong questions about it. Dr. Stephen Hussey is a clinician and author who survived a widowmaker heart attack at 34 despite normal labs and a 0 calcium score. In this episode, we talk about why cholesterol may be a distraction, how stress and nervous system signaling affect the heart, and why the heart may actually function more like a vortex than a pump. It's a conversation that challenges a lot of assumptions in a good way. Now, this episode is brought to you by Cozy Earth, by Wizard Science's new Oracle, and by Vitali Skincare, all with special offers just for you. Check out the show notes below for details and enjoy the show. Welcome to the show, Dr. Stephen Hussey. It is a pleasure to have you here today, and I am really excited to share your story.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. So we're going to blow up some preconceptions, myths, and whatnot. I listened to you speak in Copenhagen, and when you put your book up on the screen, I was like, wait, I have that book. It had been sent to me by, I don't know, maybe your PR agency or someone. And I had it in my pile of things I want to read. And then when I listened to your talk at the conference, I was just like, yeah, we need to get on this. And so we're going to wade into this world of cardiovascular disease and what the drivers may or may not be, what some of the myths are. And we're going to start with your story because you're coming from a place, and I love the opening of the book, which was when you had your event, which I'm going to let you talk about. You were pretty much at the point where you're going to write a book, and it completely put this huge kind of, all of a sudden you're like, well, if this can happen, I have no business writing a book. But now, 180 degrees turn later, you know more. I just really excited to share this conversation because I do think the whole conversation around cholesterol and the cause of cardiovascular disease, the way you describe the movement of blood and what drives it is so fascinating and so important for people to understand. So on that, let's start with you. Type 1 diabetes early on in the game, and take it away, please.
Yeah, the reason that I've been interested in health and disease for my entire adult life is because as a child, I had a lot of chronic inflammatory conditions, ultimately ending up in type 1 diabetes at age 9, which I very quickly learned, just because of going to doctors, that heavily predisposed me to heart disease, being a type 1 diabetic. And I was never really told why or anything, but so then as I, majored in health and wellness in college, and then went on to get my chiropractic degree and then a master's degree in human nutrition and functional medicine. And I would always my ears would perk up when I'd hear about heart disease because I've been told that I'm so predisposed to it. And I'm happy to say that, through lifestyle interventions, I was able to control most of those chronic diseases I had as a kid and get rid of most of them, aside from the type 1 diabetes, kind of collateral damage from that inflammation. So I thought it interesting that no doctor ever told me that I could do those things. And so I kind of gained this skepticism in Western medicine and kind of went into the health route and, mainly controlled my health, or I tried to achieve a healthy lifestyle through diet and exercise. Mainly what I did. Those are things I control. Even when I was a poor student, I could control those things,
And what did your diet look like at that time? Like what was your version of a healthy diet as a type 1 diabetic?
Early, as a kid, it was just standard American diet, which made it very hard.
It was survival,
right?
And insulin. Yeah.
Yeah. Lots of insulin. That's what they told me as a type 1. They just don't worry about the carbohydrates, processed foods, just give yourself insulin for it. Right. Yeah. And so, I learned I could change my diet. It eventually went to just whole foods. And then, I discovered low carb, maybe 12 years ago now. And that made a huge difference as far as my ability to control blood sugars. And I just thought it was interesting. I was never told that by any physician, that you can change your diet and influence my ability to control these blood sugars, use less insulin, that kind of stuff. And it went from processed food diet to whole foods diet to more paleo to then low carb. I tried carnivore for a while, but now I'm kind of back on low carb, still incorporating plants and things like that, eating seasonally. So I was always using diet to kind of move the lever for me, and then exercise. I'd always play sports. Exercise was fun for me. Always been a big camper and hiker and things like that. So that's what I was doing. And it gave me relatively good levels of health. And then.
Sorry, before you go on,
Yeah.
I'm going to cut in here just before you go on. This is something that people don't fully understand, and I'd love you to explain to the audience a little bit. Why is just using insulin a problem? Like insulin comes with a whole host of issues of its own when there's too much of it around for too long. And we hear about type 1 diabetics just like being told exactly what you were told, and they're just pounding the insulin to manage the blood sugar spikes. But what is it about insulin that you, as a type 1 diabetic, wanted to mitigate so that you weren't using as much? And then the other thing was, many people who are diabetic would hear low carb and would flip out. They'd be like, well, wait, what if I go into ketoacidosis? Right. So maybe we could just kind of pierce those two bubbles and then keep going on your story.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess necessarily for in the context of type 2 diabetes, which is where my body is making insulin, I'm not responding to it. Yeah. You're going to get high levels of insulin in that situation because your body doesn't think there's any around. It can't, it's lost the ability to respond to it. So your body doesn't think there's any. So it just keeps making more.
Right.
You're insulin resistant and your body has high levels of insulin. And in that situation, people talk a lot about how high insulin is indicative of all these different issues in the body. And in and of itself, that can cause some issues. But the real issues are how you got to that high level of insulin, the fact that you're not responding to it, and the poor metabolic health you've created to get to that point. Those are the things that are really causing the damage. And then the high blood sugars that eventually happen from that, because you can have high insulin levels well before you have high blood sugar levels. And so that's something that is an issue in medicine, because they're tracking the blood sugar. But by the time it's affecting blood sugar, it's been an issue for a very long time. Your insulin levels have been high for a very long time. Whereas in type 1, I've lost the ability to make insulin. So I am administering insulin myself, which is an art form, because sometimes it doesn't absorb as well as other times when I inject it. And there's things that can affect blood sugar. I'm trying to be a pancreas with exogenous insulin, which is a difficult thing to do. Even if I just exercise, that makes my blood sugar go up. Or if I go on stage and I have a stress response, blood sugar goes up. There's all these different things. So in that sense, I guess using more insulin as a type 1 diabetic is not as bad as having high insulin levels as a type 2, because of you as a type 2, you've gone through these situations where you've gotten to high levels of insulin pathologically. Whereas for me, it's still not a great idea as a type 1 to be using so much insulin, because that means you're probably eating a less quality diet, one that's very high in processed carbohydrates and things like that. And also it can desensitize your body to the insulin. Right. And it's the number one fat storing hormone. And we're just not really well equipped to handle that much insulin. But that's exactly what I was told as a kid. I was literally given a booklet that listed every single fast food item available at the time from all the different restaurants, and told, eat these foods, just here's the amount of carbohydrates in it. It's listed in this book. Just give yourself insulin for those carbohydrates. That's all that mattered.
I would also imagine that chronically high levels of insulin it's more catabolic, right? The presence of insulin blocks the release of growth hormone. So it would be pretty hard if your insulin is chronically elevated all the time. Even as an athlete, it would be hard to recover.
Sure. Yeah. All those different things are issues with just high levels of the hormone itself. And it's a synthetic hormone that I'm injecting. So I don't know. There's things I have concerns about that, but I have no option at this point. I have to use that.
Oh yeah. But what you're doing is reducing that delta.
Right.
So you just use having less of it around because you're not needing more of it around.
Right. And then I do that mainly through diet and lifestyle. With lifestyle, being active, it tremendously increases insulin sensitivity. So I am, increasing the value of the insulin I am giving by being active. Right. Yeah. There's lots of different things I do lifestyle wise that help me minimize the amount of insulin I need to create the blood sugar control that I want.
Hey folks, I just wanted to throw a little message in here for those of you who are sending me all these incredible questions on social media or through YouTube or even on Spotify, wherever you're listening to the podcast. I wish I could get back to you, each one of you personally, but unfortunately I can't. And because I cannot, I created about a couple of years ago now, I created a membership community where I get to hang out with people just like you. I do live weekly Q&As, almost weekly anyway. We also do have podcast guests come in to answer everybody's questions and do presentations. You get to interact live with those podcast guests. We will sometimes do challenges with some of the partners. Like in 2026, we have a mitochondrial enhancement challenge coming up where we're going to be testing mitochondrial function. We're going to be testing people's deuterium levels. If you haven't heard about deuterium, we've got podcasts coming down the pipes on that. And then people will be invited to follow a personalized protocol and then retest their mitochondria on the other side. We offer that in the membership community, and we do it at incredible discounts that you just can't find anywhere else. So if you're interested in hanging out with me and other like-minded people, which actually happen to include some pretty awesome practitioners and even some previous podcast guests who've come and joined the community, then I invite you to check it out on my website, natnidham.com/the-longevity-community, or just go to natnidham.com and look for the longevity community tab at the top of the page. Click on that and see if this is right for you. I would love to see you there. And we could make 2026 our best year ever together. So once again, that's natnidham.com. Just look for the longevity community tab at the top of the page. Now let's get back to the show.
Okay, so then let's talk about low carb and diabetic people in general. And let's talk about type 1 diabetes right now. Like type 2 diabetes is kind of a different animal. It's a metabolic dysregulation, if you will. It can be corrected through lifestyle and diet in most cases. So we're going to move that off to the side because I think the type 1 diabetes is very central to your story in the sense that it put you at very high risk for certain issues that came to pass in spite of all your good efforts. So, but just let's just quietly walk this little elephant out of the room, the low carb diet for a person who's diabetic, which people could be very freaked out about.
Yeah. And the reason they're freaked out, and I understand it from a perspective of what I was told when I was a kid, you're told that ketones or this state of ketoacidosis is a bad thing and you're meant to fear it. Right. And so then, and that's what you do. The way that you test for if you're in ketoacidosis, which really only happens if you have a wildly uncontrolled type 1 or type 2 diabetic, right? They're uncontrolled. Their blood sugars are so high, they're not getting any insulin, and their body is like, well, we have to make another fuel source, and that is ketones. And it's so pathologic in that state that you make too many ketones, and you get to the state of being acidic because of the amount of ketones that are present. And that's very different than ketosis. So that's correct. Ketoacidosis, right? And so, but as a type 1, you're testing ketones and you find any ketones in your urine and you're like, this is a bad thing. You're taught that.
Right.
Right. So then you get this diet that comes along that's going to help your body become more metabolically flexible and make ketones when it needs to. And you probably think because you've been told, oh, that's a bad thing. I don't need to do that. Right. But so the difference is the amount of ketones that are present. So in that pathologic state, your body's going to keep making them to the point where it gets to like levels of like 9 or 10. Like if you measured it in the blood, millimoles. And whereas ketosis is technically like, at optimal ketosis, you're at like 1.5 to 3 millimoles, right? So very different levels of ketones. And that reflects more metabolic health. Having ketones present at all reflects there's metabolic health. So if you eat an amount of carbohydrates, say like the night before, and then you fast through the night and you wake up with ketones present, that shows metabolic flexibility. You were able to burn through the carbohydrates and immediately go back to making ketones. And so that's like a healthy state. Ketoacidosis is a very different thing. Pathologic state where your body thinks it needs just to keep making ketones because it doesn't have a fuel source at that point because there's no insulin or insulin signaling.
Right. So it's all about holding the balance, which is more work, which is why I think probably most people are not guided to this path. So anyway, so you're going along, you're managing you're not using too much insulin, you're using what you need, you're managing your blood sugar through insulin, but also through lifestyle and diet. So you're using 3 different levers where most people are only using one. Then what?
Yeah. So I just kind of, was practicing as a chiropractor for, I practiced eventually for 13 years until I stopped. But yeah, just practicing as a chiropractor, diet and exercise, just always been interested in health and reading lots of things. But I was doing a lot of research on the heart and heart disease just out of curiosity because I've been told that I was predisposed. So I already had like a good amount of information about the heart and heart disease as far as like a function of the heart perspective, like what the actual function of the heart and the body is. Not so much about atherosclerosis heart attacks yet. Then, yes, at the age of 34, I actually suffered a widowmaker heart attack out of the blue. There was like my testing looked great according to the authorities,
Yeah.
Technically they would tell me that my cholesterol was a little high, but my CAC score 6 months prior to the heart attack was a perfect score of 0, which puts me at like less than 1% risk of having a heart attack.
Wow.
And they would have told me, yeah, you're doing fine. And then 6 months later I had a heart attack. And so, yeah, this story can get long, but, so yeah, I get to the hospital and obviously they intervene, which is what Western medicine's good at. They're good at intervening in an emergency. They're the reason I'm still here today. I could argue that the reasons they think I'm still here today and what they did may be different than what actually is going on, which was one of the themes of my talk I gave in Copenhagen. But yeah, so they found 100% blockage of the LAD, right? The left anterior descending artery. The widowmaker heart attack is what they found. And they placed a stent. And again, there's nuances, I think, to what actually saved me that day. But that's what happens. Like, and this is why blockages and stenosis or narrowing of an artery are blamed for heart attacks, is because someone starts having the symptoms of a heart attack. They go in and they find this thing that's blocking an artery, right? But we have no idea if that was there beforehand or not. Right. So there's an entirely different mechanism of heart attacks, which sounds like a very bold and crazy claim for me to make, but there's lots and lots of work that I've done and literature that I've looked at to suggest that.
I want to jump in here and just encourage people to get their hands on your book, because we don't have, this would be a 3-hour marathon if we got into the nitty gritty, which I'd be happy to do, but I don't think people don't come to me for a 3-hour marathon.
Yeah, sure.
Neither of us has blocked the time, but in the book, you do such a good job of explaining this. So just encouraging the audience, guys, like, check out the book. But in the meantime, listen to this story, because I just think it's so fascinating. Like, the treatment that you got in the hospital, the way that you were stonewalled by the medical profession. And then the fact that you actually had the wherewithal to stick to your guns, dig in a little deeper and make some really interesting discoveries.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like, thank goodness I had that previous knowledge of the heart and heart disease. So I had enough knowledge to kind of doubt what I was hearing in the hospital. And
what were you hearing? Like, what were they telling you?
Yeah. So at that point I was just like, okay, guys, I got something wrong. Like, tell me your opinion. Like, let me know what happened. And it was just a broken record. Cholesterol causes heart disease. Your cholesterol is high. And it wasn't, at that point, it wasn't even as high as it is now, high according to them. We can talk about what high actually means. And so, yeah, they were just like, yeah, and here's 5 medications you got to take the rest of your life. That was pretty much it. And so then I am an inquisitive person. I wasn't being argumentative at the time. I was just kind of like asking questions because they wanted me on these blood thinners. And I was just like, well, I understand that. There's a stent in there now. I kind of get that. But what about magnesium as a blood thinner? And they literally said, magnesium is not a blood thinner. And I was like, well, I know that's not true. I understand that they don't have a protocol in the hospital to use magnesium in replacing a blood thinner. So they can't actually do that. But there was no curiosity. And everything from, the food they gave me, which was terrible,
horrible.
Like a processed food diet. The food they told me that I should eat after I left was basically, low fat, full of processed foods. Things that were on that list were fig Newtons, animal crackers, that were things that I should be eating as part of a healthy diet. So yeah, that didn't make sense to me. The fact that there was no conversation there was no openness to conversation. It was the shutdown of conversation that was the biggest problem. I knew the philosophy was going to be different. I knew that my philosophy and their philosophy was going to be different. I knew that coming in, but it was the shutdown of conversation that bothered me the most, because I would ask questions and they didn't even want to have the conversation. And in my chart notes, I later found that I was branded as non-compliant. And so any new physician that came in would just get that perception and then not want to talk to me about it, even if I was asking them. So yeah, it was a problem. And that the solution was, you're going to be on these 5 medications the rest of your life, which were a statin, 2 blood pressure medications, a blood thinner, and a baby aspirin. That's what they wanted me on. And just as like an example, like I tell this story often, is that my blood pressure usually hovered around 112/70, right?
So you're
and
low.
They wanted me on
Yeah.
2 blood pressure medications. And the reason they want me on those things is because they think that, it's very well established that, when someone has a heart attack, that they're predisposed to developing heart failure. So they're trying to take pressure off my heart. So they want especially the beta blocker. And so I understand that. However, in the context of me at 112/70, 2 blood pressure medications is not a good idea. So I took one for one night, and then in the middle of the night, they woke me up to check your vitals, which they do 3 times a night or whatever. And I looked over and it said 90/50. And I was like, well, that's pretty low. I am asleep right now. I'm just laying out, but that's still fairly low. And so then I sat up from the bed once they left the room, and I didn't get up fast because I had all these wires hooked to me. So I got up pretty slow, and then I stood up and almost passed out. Just to turn down the thermostat in the room is what I was trying to do. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm not doing that anymore. But it's just this cookie cutter recipe that wasn't applied to the individual. And it didn't give me confidence that they were really looking at me as a person and recommending what I needed or what was more appropriate for me. It was just, this is what you get. This is the recipe for people who've had heart attacks. Here you go. And so once I got out of there, I did not take any of their medications aside from the blood thinner for 6 months because there was a stent in there. And even then I took a lesser dose than they recommended. These are just my decisions, not medical advice or recommendations.
No,
but
for
this
sure.
is just what I decided to do. And I did my own heart health healing routine. And over the next 2 years, I was able to heal my heart as far as prevent heart failure, ejection fraction return to normal, conductivity of the heart tissue return to normal. I also developed a 75 to 99% blockage of plaque in my leg because of the procedure they did to place the stent. And so I was able to, they told me that would be that way for the rest of my life. And you couldn't reverse that, especially as a type 1 diabetic. And over 2 years, I reversed that completely without medications. And I've gotten imaging of the coronary arteries in my heart. I did that earlier this year. It's been almost a year now, and they're clean. My heart arteries are clean. So the stent is patent. There's a small amount of plaque in the right coronary artery that was there at the time of the heart attack. So that hasn't progressed, and everything else is clean and open. And this is with cholesterol levels astronomically higher than what they say they should be, because I can explain why that is too, because of the way that I'm eating, because I'm low carb. There's a phenomenon that happens that can raise it, if you consider that raised. We have to define the parameters of what cholesterol should be. So I was able to do things that they told me were impossible, that I wouldn't be able to do. And I would argue that they feel they're impossible because within the walls of what they do, they don't see that stuff happen. Do something different, I got a different result.
Why do you think you had a heart attack?
So I think
this maybe goes into a different part of the conversation, because you talk about the heart. Maybe it's not a pump. We talk about, like you bring forward a lot of really interesting discussions. And what you don't know is, on my way home from Copenhagen, I ran into a guy at the airport who struck up a conversation with me because our flight was delayed, because, that's what happens. And it turns out that he's a dude that's just invented an artificial heart. And it's the first artificial heart that it's based on Tesla's work, or it uses Tesla concepts, if you will. And he started telling me that the heart's not a pump. He started talking about how it's the way this pump works is through rotation.
Vortexing, yeah.
Through a vortex.
Toroidal fields, pretty much, yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
which
is a
I
very
was
Tesla
like,
type thing to talk about, yeah.
Exactly. So I was like, I'd just come out of Copenhagen. I just heard you speak. I was starting to look through the book, and I was like, okay, the universe is kind of
telling you something.
It's telling me something.
Yeah. And so, like, why I had a heart attack, I don't know that has much to do with what I think the true function of the heart is. Well, it does a little bit, which we can get into. But yes, I don't believe the main role of the heart in the body is to act like a pressure propulsion pump to move the blood. Matter of fact, there's really no evidence for that. And it's kind of impossible to think of a heart that size being able to forcefully move the blood throughout the entire body. Yet that's what medicine thinks. And so if you don't understand the actual function of the heart, how are you supposed to understand how to make it better when something goes wrong with it? And that's a huge issue, especially with heart failure and arrhythmias and things like that. Not understanding the true function of the heart is a problem. And it's why they struggle with conditions like that, because they don't understand how to truly make it work. And so it's very interesting that and there's people There's scientists back in the 1800s who were trying to build a system like a replica of the system of the cardiovascular setup with pressure propulsion pumps, and they couldn't get it to work
because they couldn't generate enough pressure to send the blood.
Right. They couldn't
right?
get to work, because if you make it act like a pressure propulsion pump, that's not how the vascular system works. It has to do with hydraulics and pressure changes, and the heart is a vortex. And so the pressure changes are really what drive like something like the pulse and things like that. But what drives blood flow in the periphery is actually structured water on the lining of the arteries. It's the main driver of blood flow, which we can get into as well. But the original question was why I had a heart attack. And there are two different mechanisms of heart attacks. One is acute clotting situations where you can get a blockage, but it's not because of the stenosis of an artery. Like, it's not because there's a gradual narrowing of an artery that eventually blocks it, or some of that plaque ruptures off and causes a blockage. Ruptures happen all the time, but there's lots of literature to suggest that they don't cause heart attacks. It's very rare that a rupture causes a heart attack. What happens is you get a clotting response in blood. Now, that clotting response can be more likely to happen if you have stenosis of plaque in the artery already, because it disrupts blood flow, and disrupted blood flow becomes stagnant, and stagnant blood likes to clot more. And so that's one issue there. But then the other mechanism of heart attacks has to do completely with the autonomic nervous system signaling to the heart, which is, when we think about nervous system, we think about stress, right? And the stress signal. So putting that together, you understand, like, it's very well known in medicine and conventional wisdom that heart attacks are associated with more stressful days of the year. They're associated with Mondays. They're associated with major holidays and sporting events where people are betting too much money and losing and that kind of stuff, or even daylight savings. When we shift the time,
it's a huge
and
one.
how stressful to our nervous system that is, we get lots of heart attacks. And again, that's very well known in medicine. So it makes sense that there's this mechanism of heart attacks that when we get imbalanced signaling to the heart tissue itself, it causes a cascade of events that can cause heart tissue death. And so there's this work of this scientist named Giorgio Beraldi, who I've yet to meet a cardiologist who's aware of his work, which just fascinates me, that nobody's aware of his work, even though he basically flipped the field of cardiology on its head. Maybe that's why they're not aware of it. But basically, he showed that anytime an artery gets to about 60 or 70% narrowed, the body builds collaterals around it. And cardiologists are very aware of collaterals. They understand that happens, but I've been told by many cardiologists that some people have them and some people don't. Well, based on Beraldi's work, and he autopsied thousands of hearts during his career, everybody builds collaterals.
So you're talking about alternate routes, like new blood vessels that make up for the blockage.
The body builds new blood vessels to make up for the blood flow. And they've shown in animal models that these blood vessels can form as fast as 4 days and fully compensate the heart with blood. Yeah, it's very quickly. Because people say it could take years for collaterals to form. It's like, not based on those animal studies. It can be very, very fast. Your body can figure things out. So a big theme here is that what medicine is doing is treating the solution to the problem that the body has. The solution to the problem is plaque and collaterals, and they're trying to treat that. They're trying to treat the plaque. But when in doing that, they're ignoring the actual causes of heart disease, which are clotting, pretty much. Acute clotting that can happen at a low-grade level, meaning plaque over time, and that happens in the artery wall, not on the lining of the artery itself, or acute clotting that happens fast enough that it can block a whole artery instantaneously, which could have been the case with me, right? Also, because they found a blockage there. Also, I was going through a lot of stress at the time. COVID was happening. There were things happening during COVID I didn't agree with. I let myself get caught up into it. There was some relationship stress. I found out very stressful news about a close family member a day and a half before I had the heart attack. That was probably the most stressful. And it wasn't just the news. It was the inability of me or anybody in my family to help this person. We couldn't get to them. They were in another country. It was COVID. We couldn't get to them. And so we were just waiting to see if it would be okay. And I was also pretty dehydrated at the time, which is not good for blood flow. I had convinced myself to only drink water when I was thirsty, and I was on this low carb diet, and that was kind of dehydrating me a little bit, and I was suffering with some constipation, and I was getting ready to do something about it. My body was giving me the signals, hey, this is not okay, change it. And I was getting ready to do something, and I just hadn't yet. And then I woke up Tuesday morning, a day and a half after I got that news, and did a HIIT workout. And so where I sprint up a hill, drop and do push-ups to failure, lunges to failure, that kind of thing. And I did that 5 times. And then 20 minutes later, I'm having a heart attack. So it could have been that whole situation caused an acute blockage to form. And that's what they found. They found the blockage of the LAD, but I don't know that if that was there before the heart attack happened. It could have been because cardiologists will tell you this. They'll go in sometimes and they'll just for like, a heart cath to check on somebody, and they find 100% blockage and this person's not having any symptoms whatsoever.
Yeah.
So that doesn't mean that was the cause of my heart attack. It could have been this stress thing. And then I did this workout and that was the straw that broke the camel's back. And then I started having the stress response signaling to the heart that triggered, again, the details of the cascade of events that happens during that is in my book, that can cause tissue death. Now, they placed a stent, and when they placed the stent, my symptoms went away, but they also gave me morphine at the same time. So did the stent open up the artery, restore blood flow, and cause my symptoms to go away, or did the morphine calm my stress response and cause the symptoms to stop? I don't know, and I'll probably never know.
No.
But the solution to preventing both of those types of situations, whether it was the blockage or the stress response, are the same things. So I just got to do those things. And that's what gives me the confidence it's not going to happen again, because I figured out those two mechanisms and how they potentially could have happened to me. And now I know how to prevent them. And they involve way, way more than diet and exercise. And so one of my big missions, I guess, in life now is to educate people about how heart disease and heart attacks are not, to my opinion, have very little to do with diet. Like a processed food diet can be a contributor because it's inflammatory. You're eating a lot of toxins, you're contributing to insulin resistance, which are things. But this whole conversation about plants versus animals, saturated versus unsaturated fat, like all this stuff, it's a big distraction, I think, from the actual causes of heart disease. And this obsession with cholesterol is also a giant distraction from the actual causes of heart disease. We have been treating people for cholesterol through trying to control cholesterol through diet and drugs for the last 50 years. And heart disease is still the number one killer in the world. We have the incidence is still the same. The deaths have come down, and they would argue that statins and lowering cholesterol is why we have a decreased death rate from heart disease, but that's not the case. The reason we have a decreased death rate is because around the very same time we introduced statins, we also invented procedures that save people from dying from heart attacks. So that's why we have less death from heart attacks. Better. Okay. Right? We have stent procedures, we have interventions like I went through. Like that's why we have less deaths, but the incidence is still the same and rising.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not about those things. Those are a giant distraction. And when I found out, the actual causes that make more sense to me, and I implemented those in my life, I didn't know they were going to work when I did them, but I kind of came up with these theories and did them, and they did work very beautifully. Then I figured out why. Now I share that with people.
So okay, and we're going to get to that. I want to get to that, but I'm curious. You were a chiropractor, but then you went ahead and did that thing that this is an area of knowledge that is so lacking in conventional medicine. You actually went and got a master's in nutrition in addition to functional medicine. Where do you think those two things came together to really form the basis for what you do now and your knowledge? Like, how did those, I
actually, I say this, and it's probably not entirely true, but I say, like, I don't use much of what I learned in my degrees at all at this point, as far as like my chiropractic degree or my functional medicine degree. I don't know. Like, I feel like it was all useful to learn this basic understanding of how we think the body works. But as I delve farther and further into things and different science, and I look at it from biophysics perspective, I'm just like, I think that we got it all wrong, or maybe not all wrong, but it's so incomplete.
Well, to challenge the heart as a pump is a pretty bold statement. Now, you're not alone, but you are one of the louder voices, and a lot of the people who did claim that are dead. Now, we've got my man, Billy, will end up on the podcast, but he also poo-pooed me when I asked him about, a lot of people think about the heart as a nervous center, the heart as a very important emotional stress. Yeah. And he kind of went, yeah, whatever. It's your adrenals releasing cortisol. It has nothing to do with your heart. So that'll be a different conversation. Yeah. But I would say that he's on point with you in terms of challenging this idea of the heart as a pump versus the heart as a vortex. How do you explain that to, like, how do we help people to think about, and what is it, and why does it matter?
really.
Yeah. So yeah, well, first I'll tell people, like before I go into this, I'll tell people that I describe this in my book in chapter 6 is where I talk about the heart and the evidence for the heart not being a pressure propulsion pump as we think of it as pressure propulsion pump. And like you said, I'm not alone in this. There are other people that talk about this. And if people want the most comprehensive with tons and tons of literature cited to support this claim, Dr. Branko First's book called The Heart and Circulation is probably the most comprehensive. It reads like a 200-page research paper, though. I'm just warning you.
This will not be your
Yeah,
most.
it's not like a fun read. It's not a narrative read, you know. But
There's
yeah,
no story.
like, the evidence is all there, and there's tons and tons of literature. This is not just some crazy thing, but it's also logical. Think about it. Like there's studies that they look at the efficiency of the heart. If you look at it as a pressure propulsion pump, the amount of energy the heart uses in the amount of work, quote unquote, that it does, it's about 15 to 30% efficient. Which, whether you believe we were created or we were evolved, that's not an efficient way to do something, right? If you're using that much energy and getting that little little output from it, that's not efficient. So it makes me think that we're looking at it wrong. We have the wrong framework of what we're looking at it as. And so, yeah, like the heart, when you see it contracting, it's logical to think, oh yeah, it's pumping, right? When in reality, it's contracting.
But it's twisting, right? Like the fibers are circular almost.
Right. So I think the first thing we should talk about is if the heart is not moving the blood, what is moving the blood? So just real briefly, the heart does do a very small amount of moving of blood, but it's just enough to get the blood through the chambers of the heart itself, right? Other than that, once it gets out into the periphery, the blood moves in a different way. And that is via structured water formation on the lining of the blood vessels. And so what structured water is this gel-like form of water. Most of the water in the body is in this gel-like state, which is why I feel like a gel, like the water in my cells is a gel.
Squishy. Yep.
Yeah, like I can take with tissue in my form and it bounces right back like Jell-O. And so what makes structured water form is when we have water that's toxin-free and mineral-rich, and we have energy to that water. And energy for that water comes from the sun, from infrared light. And so that makes sense. We live on a water planet charged by the sun. That's what we do. And we are made of primarily water, and we're supposed to be charged by the sun. So we get the structured water, but there's liquid water in the body too, like in the blood and in the lymphatic system and the cerebral spinal fluid. But some of this liquid water, when it gets next to a biological surface, a water-loving surface, it will form itself into structured water. And structured water, there's this layer of structured water. There's supposed to be a layer of structured water on the lining of the arteries. And if you go into the literature and you type in cell-free layer, you'll see that they've found it, because the structured water, where the structured water is, red blood cells can't get through it. So they call it the cell-free layer.
Interesting.
And so in Dr. Pollack's lab, they proved that this happens in chick embryos, in the arteries of chick embryos. And when structured water forms, because of the way that it forms, it creates an energy gradient. So the detail, without getting into the details, structured water becomes very electronegatively charged because of the chemistry of how it forms. And next to it is very positively charged space because there's a concentration of hydrogens in there, and a positive next to a negative is a battery. So when we form structured water in the body, we're basically creating batteries, energy storage forms of batteries, which is the main energy storage form of the body. It's not ATP, it's structured water, it should be. Anyways, in this situation, that energy gradient that's formed does the work of moving fluid. And they've shown this over and over again in Dr. Pollack's lab. You can take a tube made of a hydrophilic or water-loving surface, put it in a vat in water, shine infrared light on it, and provide energy to the system. Structured water forms on the lining of the tube, and the water starts moving through the tube with no pump acting on it whatsoever. Yeah. They've done that over and over again in his lab. They've shown that that's what happens in tree roots. It's how water gets from the trees, the ground, all the way up to the leaves, right? Through this mechanism.
Because there's no other, how else would it get there?
Trees don't have hearts,
pump.
you know?
Yeah.
So that's how water is moving. That's how blood is moving in our system for the most part. And so then it becomes curious to think, why do we have this thing, this heart that's contracting, and it's placed in the middle of the vascular system? Like if I was going to pump water up a hill, like from my feet up to my head, where would I put the pump? At the bottom. Up to the top. And that's not where the heart is placed. It's placed in the middle of this flow of blood through these two sides of the vascular system. Why? The reason why is twofold. One is that when you look at the heart, you look at the orientation of the muscle fibers in the heart, it's actually one big band of muscle that's wrapped up on itself. And there's a scientist named Francisco Torrent-Quast from Spain who figured this out. He did these blunt dissections of the heart and he found this out. So when the signal for contraction comes through the heart, it comes through in a spiral like that. because the heart's wrapped up on itself. So the heart is doing this. It's vortexing, it's spiraling.
It's vortexing, yeah.
And so, but also water is vortexed and kind of disrupted, so to speak, as it moves through the chambers of the heart. It flows in, it kind of flows in like you ever put one of those quarters in the thing and it flows around like this and then it goes down to the thing.
Yeah.
The blood flows in the heart chambers like that. It flows in and does this.
Circularly.
When it leaves the valves, it eddies on either side. There's all this vortexing that's happening. And then when the heart contracts, it's also vortexing it as well. And so the purpose of that is because that's what nature is doing to water. Water on this planet is not sitting still. It's moving. Mm-hmm. It's flowing in rivers. It's crashing on the beaches, the ocean, tidal currents, evaporation, precipitation. Water is moving. And if you get a bunch of water in laminar tubes, it's not being swished around and moved like it is in a river or crashing on the beach, that kind of stuff. And so what do we need? We need something that can mix up water, can vortex, swish water around, because that's what energizes it. Because in Dr. Pollack's lab, they found one of the ways you can also energize water, aside from infrared light, is to vortex it, swish it around in the presence of oxygen. Well, it's no mistake that there's oxygen present in blood. And now we're vortexing it around as it moves through the heart. So that's the purpose of the heart, is to energize the water.
Yeah, so it's charging the water to move, which is ultimately how the blood moves.
Right. So in a way, the heart is responsible for the movement of blood, and in a sense, because it's vortexing the blood, energizing it. So when it gets into the periphery, the water can perform structured water. But I don't think the heart can do that itself, which is why we're supposed to be in the right environments to create structured water too, which means outside, in contact with the earth and under the sunlight, because those are the things that charge the body. And when you charge the body, you build structured water, which creates blood movement. Now, the second aspect of why the heart is there is because it's actually there to slow the flow of blood during exertion, right? And there's some eloquent studies done in endurance athletes and soccer players that show this, that the reason, in endurance athletes, their heart gets it gets bigger, this hypertrophy of the heart.
Bigger. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's not because it's better at forcefully moving blood in those people. It's because it's better at stopping blood, because those people are creating an onslaught of blood flow because of how active they are. And so it's kind of like the heart becomes a bigger catcher's mitt, right? Mm-hmm. So that it can catch the blood and then vortex it and move it through the chambers of the heart. And so that's why it becomes bigger. So, but the thing is that if I was to go for a run, the tissue demand for oxygen and nutrients would be so great that all the blood would rush over to the arterial side trying to deliver those nutrients. And if the heart wasn't there to slow the flow of blood during exertion, like these endurance athletes, then all the blood would go over to the arterial side, the venous side would collapse and we would die. Which is why those scientists who were doing those experiments back in the 1800s were trying to create a system like this that maintains perfusion pressure in both sides, and they couldn't with the pressure propulsion pump, because that's not what the heart is. Mm-hmm. It's actually there to slow the flow of blood, right?
Interesting.
And one of the most fascinating things I heard is there's a cardiovascular surgeon who read my book, and he said, I learned why when we perfuse the blood away from the heart during heart surgery, the pulse goes away. And it's because with a pressure propulsion pump, there's no changes in pressure, right? With the way the heart works in a vortexing heart, it builds up pressure in a ventricle and then a valve opens and pressure goes out, right? And that creates a pulse. But if you don't have those changes in pressure and the constant changes throughout, like the pump actually acts more like a hydraulic ram, which is very based on flow and pressure. And so we actually have two hydraulic rams next to each other. The right and the left side. And so when he read that, he was just like, oh, that's why when we take a perfusion away from the heart and we use a pressure propulsion pump to keep the blood moving, the pulse goes away, right? It's because the heart doesn't function like that.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And then the third reason the heart is there, the third role of the heart is it is a sensory organ, and it senses our emotional state. And it does that because it has a giant electromagnetic field that's bigger than any electromagnetic field of any organ in the body, which you'd think the brain's would be bigger because it's so electrical and it's just the same amount of mitochondria in the brain, but the heart's is bigger because it's vortexing. Again, it goes back to the vortexing. So when you vortex and create a spiral inside an electromagnetic field, it amplifies the field significantly.
Right.
And we've shown that in science before. So that's what's happening. And so the heart is a sensory organ, electromagnetically sensing our environment and our emotional state, which is why we say we associate this organ with emotions, right? I love you with all my heart. You feel emotions, heart. You feel pain and my heartache, there's a reason we say that. It's not a coincidence.
So in your healing journey and in your evolution of thinking here about how people might want to consider ways to adopt a healthier way of being, I mean, it is interesting. It's not so much about the diet. I mean, yes, like clean up your diet, obviously, but really it's about the environment. Really, it's about managing your stress. Really, it's about circadian rhythm. It's about light, even grounding, structured water, play. So how are you convincing people? You know what I mean? Like,
Well,
and what does it look like for you? Maybe,
yeah, and that's what I was
that's a
gonna
better
say,
place to start. Like, what does it look like for you? Because, if, and I also want to eventually go back to the plaque to the clot in your leg and how you got rid of that, which I remember you saying in your talk, doctors looking at it going, yeah, well, that's not possible. And you're like, okay, but it is because I did. And they're like, well, and then you got, once again, just like when you were in the hospital, it was like, well, I'm not talking to you. Yeah, but aren't you curious?
Yeah. That was the line that was given to me. Like at first it was a 75 to 99% blockage of plaque. And then in a year it went down to 50 or less is what they said based on ultrasound. And they did the test twice because they didn't believe it.
Sure.
They sent the technician back in there and they did it twice and it got the same result. And he's looking at the results and he said, well, we can't say it's better because we don't see these things get better. And I was like, well, but we just did though. Like, why not say what's different about this one so I can learn? But there was none of that. And then even then I came back a year later and it was completely normal. And I came back a year after that, it was still normal. And there was still no inquisition about why.
And so what did you do? Like what, and I mean, these conversations dovetail, right?
Yeah.
The
Right,
lifestyle,
definitely.
the environment, and the plaque reversal, because that in theory is impossible. So let's.
Yeah. So basically when I went home, my diet stayed the same. It stayed low carb. And because I'm low carb and I'm running more on fats, it means that there's more fat in my blood to be available for energy, providing energy. So that's a lean mass hyperresponder type situation. I eat low carb, my LDL goes up, not because it's bad for me or in a state of inflammation or anything like that, just because I'm metabolizing more fats. And that's what happens for me. It happens for a lot of people, but always in the context of low metabolic risk. So anyways, my diet stayed the same. My exercise stayed the same. It had to change a little bit, my exercise, because my leg situation wouldn't allow me to walk. So I had to, as soon as I figured out I could bike and instead of having to run, it didn't cause pain when I biked, then I could do that instead. Exercise stayed the same. My stress probably got even worse for a few years after the heart attack for various reasons. But it got worse. And so what I changed was I started doing a lot more grounding. I started prioritizing. The main thing I did was I prioritized getting infrared light, which was sunlight. And I also bought an infrared sauna. So I prioritized that. I set my circadian rhythm and I took a few supplements for a year. I took some taurine, and I took some arginine and I took some serapeptase and a supplement called wabi, which creates a parasympathetic signaling for the heart. I took those for about a year and then I stopped them. And so the healing continued after that. And so, in a year's time, in 3 months' time of using just the sauna, my heart recovered. And they were shocked. They were like, oh, I guess you decided to take your medications. And I was like, actually, I'm just taking
not so much.
But then I got the development of plaque in my leg from the procedure. So that happened because the procedure they did change the blood flow dynamics going down my leg. So I want to illustrate that point.
Yeah, talk about that.
My cholesterol did not change, right? I had no plaque in my leg. The morning of the heart attack, I did that HIIT workout. My leg was fine. I was getting blood flow down to my leg just fine. And my cholesterol was slightly elevated at that time. And it got even higher after the fact. And so, but what changed was the blood flow dynamics down my leg. And that caused the plaque.
Because of the stent. So that there was a relationship.
Not the stent, so the place where they went into my groin to go up and place the stent.
Oh, okay.
That spot there where they intervened. It's not like terribly common, but it does happen. And it happened to me. And I've talked to other people that it happened to as well. Because of the device they use to close that artery, after they go in here, it changes the blood flow. Because there's a piece of it, like if here's the artery, there's a piece of it that sits on the inside of it. So it changes the blood flow dynamics. And in some people, it changes it enough that I get stagnant blood in this area of my leg. And it's the most common place to develop peripheral artery disease. And it happened right there. So then it was restricting blood flow to my lower leg. So if I would even walk fast through the airport trying to catch a flight, like I would feel pain in my leg because I wasn't getting blood to it when I would exert myself. But they decided not to do anything about it because I could do most of the things in my life. I just couldn't, I couldn't exercise the way I wanted to. I couldn't snowboard, play soccer, things like that. But I could generally live my life
Just live
without.
your life. Yeah.
So they just said, let's leave it alone. And then I didn't know at the time, but the things I was doing eventually reversed it. And that was soft plaque, I'm guessing, because it was so newly formed. So
Right.
I reversed this soft plaque in my leg over 2 years. And which again, they told me were impossible. They even told me it was impossible when I did it. And so those are the things that I changed though. And the reason that I think that had such an impact on the plaque is because plaque is clotting tissue, right? So clotting tissue forms when we can get poor stagnant blood flow. Well, let's back up. So clotting tissue forms in the artery wall itself, right? It's not like if here's the lining of the artery and the inside lining.
So it's in the wall of the artery.
Right?
Yeah.
So if my hands together are the wall of the artery, it forms inside the wall like this, and it expands the wall on both sides.
And isn't that what the CIMT looks at? When the CIMT, when people have their CIMT imaged, it's looking at the thickness of the wall. It's not looking
the
at the
carotid intimal
inside.
media thickness, right? That's the test, right?
Yeah.
They're looking at it's the intimal wall. So how does it get in there, right? People will say that, this cholesterol embeds itself in there and it gets into the intimal wall, which has just never been proven, right? And if cholesterol does interfere with the endothelial cells and somehow get in there, it's always a downstream effect from the initial things that happen, right? So what happens is something causes the cells that line the lining of the artery, something causes them to start to grow and proliferate, right? So there's a few things that could cause that to happen. One is damage. So when you have damage to something, the repair process is a very proliferative one, right? You make new cells, you grow new tissue and things like that. So inflammation and damage is one thing that could cause that. Another thing is interrupted blood flow. So if we get stagnant blood, your blood vessels try and constrict themselves with the muscles to create less surface area so that it moves faster. Just like if you have like a faucet and you put like a narrow thing on it, it comes out faster, right?
Yeah.
Or you put your thumb over the end of a garden hose, it comes out faster, right?
Yeah.
So that's what the arteries are trying to do. And one way they try and do that is to constrict the blood vessels with muscles in the blood vessels. But another way they do it is the cells lining the arteries start to grow in, proliferate, and create.
So it narrows the opening, so it creates more pressure.
Right.
Yeah.
And when you get a growth of endothelial cells, those new cells, they need a blood supply too. And that blood supply does not come from the blood flowing down the middle of the artery. It comes from these small arteries that supply the artery wall with blood. They're called the vasa vasorum.
Right.
And so like if you've got, here's the outside of the artery wall and here's the inside of it, right? And the inside of it, you got these cells growing, these proliferative cells, they're growing in. And so the vasa vasorum here have to grow in and make new arteries to supply these new cells that are growing inside here, right? And when you grow new blood vessels, there's a process, there's a time period where they're fenestrated. They have holes in them because they're incomplete. It's kind of like you're building a house and there's no windows and doors on it yet.
Right.
There's that time period where there's holes, right? And when there's holes in a blood vessel, blood leaks, right? And when blood leaks, guess where it leaks? Right into the intimal layer.
And
right?
It's not
That's
flowing, it's just sitting there.
Yeah. And then once it leaves the blood vessels, now there's nothing making it flow. It's just stagnant blood sitting there. And you get stagnant blood clots. And the reason that type 2 diabetes is such a risk factor for more plaque in arteries is because if you're trying to grow new arteries, you need insulin signaling to do that. If you're insulin resistant, those arteries stay fenestrated and holy for longer. So more blood leaks, you get more amounts of plaque, right? So then you get this clotting that happens in the middle of the artery and it starts expanding it like this. And again, it's both sides. So it's not like it just grows on the inside portion of it. Right? It's both sides. And when you look at like clear analysis or heart flow analysis, you see it. It's expanding the artery this way. Now, once you get that in there, now you've got blood trying to flow past this bump, right? And that's where clotting tissue can form on the outside of this here, on the inside. Because now if blood flows past, you ever seen rock or water flow past a rock in a river, it eddies on the other side.
Yeah, it creates little swirls.
Right. It creates this stagnant blood. And so if you've got blood that's hyperviscous, or sticking together too much because you don't have enough structured water in your arteries, which we can talk about, or you've got poor stagnant blood flow, or you've got these bumps in the arteries now that blood's having to try to make its way around and curling, then increased clotting risk. So the reason that plaque increases the risk of a heart attack is not because the plaque causes the heart attack or slowly blocks it, or a plaque piece of that ruptures, because a piece of that could rupture but the evidence shows that doesn't cause a heart attack. It just makes more plaque. It builds more plaque on it, right?
Mm-hmm.
The reason we have heart attacks, or the reason stenosis or narrowing of an artery increases risk of heart attacks, is because it disrupts blood flow. And in people who are inflamed and have viscous blood, that's more likely to happen. And that's exactly what we see.
And this is where dehydration comes in as well, right? Like chronic dehydration must be a major piece of the puzzle here. And so many people are chronically
and the other thing
dehydrated.
is that, so we talked about structured water lining the artery, and that's what keeps blood moving. So it's more important to have that if you've got these bumps in there that the blood's having to find its way around. The other thing is that structured water, because of its properties, it's called exclusion zone water too, because nothing can penetrate it, right? Only very small hydrated ions of minerals can penetrate it, including the precursor to nitric oxide, which is why nitric oxide can come from the endothelial cells and make it through structured water and come into the blood vessels, but nothing else can. So red blood cells can't, lipoproteins can't. If you've got structured water there, it protects it. So if you want to prevent an inflammatory clotting response, you want to protect the artery, which means we need structured water on the lining of the artery.
Do you think that drinking structured water is helpful?
I mean,
there's all these different, I'm about to have a system installed in my house, which in addition to removing things I don't want, is going to structure the water
So technically you can't drink structured water. It's kind of a semantics thing with naming, right? So structured water is in a gel-like state. Yeah. So if I was trying to drink that, I'd be trying to drink Jell-O.
Interesting.
So
Because
you can
people talk about vortexing water and
energizing the water.
Okay.
You're giving energy to the water so that when it gets next to a biological surface, it will structure itself, or a water-loving surface, it'll become that gel-like water.
So I'm being an external heart by energizing the water and then drinking it. It has better energy, so it might behave better in my body.
Yeah. So you want toxin-free, mineral-rich, energized water. And that's what it should be. That's what nature is, right? That's what nature is doing. We have toxin-free, it should be toxin-free water. We're kind of toxifying our water supply. And it has mineral-rich. Natural springs are full of minerals, and they're moving. They're being swished around. They're flushing over rocks and rivers. They're crashing on.
And they're being filtered through sand and whatever. I mean, in a perfect world where we're not dumping toxins.
That's why this makes sense to me, because this is what nature is doing. And our bodies are just trying to maintain that in ourselves, and we're doing things to interfere with that. So then when you drink water, that's more ideal. You can kind of pre-treat your water so that when it gets into you, it becomes structured water.
Correct.
Okay, you can also do things to your body that will structure the water that's already in us.
Like the infrared
light, right? So and why this makes sense, because the sun is infrared light. Anytime the sun is up, it's about 40 to 50% infrared light. All life on the planet is supposed to be outside in that. We are not. We live indoors. Like the average person lives 93% of the time indoors, away from these stimuli, right? So, and to me, it's no coincidence that heart disease started to skyrocket in the 50s when we invented fluorescent light. And then later in the 70s, we invented LED bulbs. Because before that, we had incandescent and candles, which were giving us some infrared. So it's just a lot of different things. And there's lots of different factors. It's not just light of why we have heart disease. But the third component of this is that structured water also forms on all biological surfaces. That includes the elements of blood, like red blood cells, lipoproteins. And we have literature that shows that the red blood cells and lipoproteins hold this zeta potential around them, or they're supposed to anyways. It's a negative charge. And that negative charge is structured water, because structured water is negatively charged. And when all the elements of blood hold a negative charge, like charges repel each other, right? So they don't stick together.
So you have more viscosity.
Right. Yeah. So you have it's less viscous when that happens.
Sorry, it's less viscous. It's more slippery. Yeah.
Yeah, more slippery. And that's another property of structured water is it's frictionless. So if you have structured water lining the artery and you have elements of blood that have the structured water, it's just zooming through there like an ice skate on an ice skating rink, and it's just flowing right past us, and things aren't sticking together. I mean, if you ever looked at live blood analysis and stuff like that, they look at the rouleau formation, where they look at the agglutination of the blood. Guess what that is? Lack of structured water in your body, allowing things to clump together. And what better way to predispose you to clotting than that? So again, this is all about lack of energy, is what this is.
Yeah.
And so
or miss energy. What are your thoughts on non-native EMFs? Because there's a lot of talk about overexposure to non-native EMFs will cause that clumping of blood, those rouleaus to form, robbing the red blood cells essentially of that electrical charge that they need to repel each other.
Right. So think about it like this. And people tell me I'm good at making it logical or a reason why. Because I could tell you that, yes, there's literature that shows that a Wi-Fi router destroys structured water. And that there's also literature that shows that an electromagnetic field destroys the zeta potential around a lipoprotein, which if you destroy that zeta potential, that's its protection. Then what do you get? Oxidized LDL, small dense particles. That's what you get. It's inflammation, right? But the reason that this makes sense is because if you think about life on the planet, before humans came along, the only electromagnetic fields that we were exposed to was the light from the sun. Because light, all visible light, is on the same electromagnetic spectrum as radio frequency or electromagnetic frequency, right? These man-made ones that we've made. And so the ones from the sun, UV through infrared, all of them will structure water. They will provide energy to the body, right? UV does it the least effectively. Infrared does it the most effectively, which is why I recommend infrared as far as a sauna or whatever. And so those are the spectrum. That's the wavelengths of light on the spectrum that provide energy to the body. Anything outside that is non-native. So it makes sense that those things would do the opposite, right? Or they may not have the effect. At the very least, they wouldn't have the effect that the things that humans had forever, right?
Yeah.
And that's what we find. We have some literature that suggests a Wi-Fi router can break down structured water. And like I told you, the zeta potential around a lipoprotein is broken down with EMF. That's why it makes sense, because it's not something our bodies are used to. And so it also explains why, I don't know if you're aware of the studies that show that the wireless radio frequencies open up calcium gated channels in the cells and the calciums flood in. Well, this is a whole new concept. I don't think calcium gated channels have ever been proven to exist. I think that what controls the amount of ionic minerals in and out of a cell is structured water, because the cell is structured water. Okay. So when a cell, we know there's this ion distribution in a cell, that there's sodium outside the cell and potassium inside the cell. Well, I mentioned how structured water is an exclusion zone, right?
Yeah.
But there are certain hydrated ions of minerals that can penetrate structured water, and it's anything potassium or smaller.
Interesting.
So if the cell is structured water and we have this concentration of potassium in the cell because it can get into structured water and sodium can't, that's the cutoff, is right there. We get this distribution like that. So calcium is bigger. Hydrated calcium is bigger than hydrated sodium, so it doesn't penetrate it. However, if you get an EMF signal that destroys structured water in a cell, guess what influxes into the cell? Calcium. And that's exactly what we're seeing. With EMF exposure, we're seeing calcium get influxed in the cell. Why? Because we're destroying structured water with EMF exposure.
So you're destroying the whole function, whole functional piece of how the body protects itself and controls what gets in, what gets out.
Yeah,
That's
because
really
structured water is like, it's fascinating. And so Dr. Gerald Pollack is probably the foremost authority on it. But there are many scientists in the past that have discovered this gel-like form of water and this phenomenon that water does. But Dr. Pollack wrote a book called Cells, Gels, and the Engines of Life. And he basically shows how the body controls much of physiology by creating phase transitions, by structured water going to liquid water and back to structured water. It does these things that moves ions around. Anybody who studied cellular physiology or medicine may recognize that as an action potential. That's what we learn about what it is. It's this change of polarity in the cell that happens. Why does that happen? Because we get an influx of a certain amount of nutrient and then structured water forms and it's pushed out again. And that's an action potential. And it's all based off of structured water and how it functions in the body. So it's very, very interesting to think about it. It's why I say things like, I think that what I learned in school was very incomplete and wrong in a lot of cases, because when you start learning at it from a biophysics perspective, which everything in this universe is energy, that's what the purpose of life is. You start to understand things at a much deeper level. And it's explained a lot of things for me as far as why this happened to me, why we have these epidemics of disease. It explains a lot.
Well, and what you said at the beginning of the podcast, which is borderline heresy, is, well, it's not about ATP. Where, to the whole world, it's all about ATP. It's all about mitochondria. And definitely, we're not saying ATP is not important. But if you don't have these energy gradients that you're talking about, then the ATP never happens either.
Exactly. So
because it's the whole NAD, NADH balance in this, that whole interplay in the cell, again, is part of an energy gradient. Like we're...
Right. Yeah. And so what creates that energy gradient, that division of those in the cell, is structured water, I would argue.
This is the structured water episode. I thought it was going to be the cardiac episode, but it's really the structured water.
It blows my mind. It explains so much for you when you look at it from this perspective. And it also leads me forward to what I need to do, right? We're basically just creating environments that divorce us from our energy sources. And then we're trying to get all of our energy from food, and it's not working. We're overwhelming that metabolic pathway of getting energy, which is only supposed to be about a third of our energy. We should be getting it much more from sunlight and grounding and things like that. But yeah, ATP is important. It's definitely an energy storage form in the body, and just this phosphate bond that holds this energy. But its role is not to supply the body or cell with energy. Its role is to hold energy to unfold proteins in the cell, right? So when you unfold proteins in the cell, what do you create? More hydrophilic surface area for what? Structured water formation. And structured water formation is what really holds the energy. The reason that cells have this net negative charge is because they're full of structured water, which is negatively charged. It's not because of big proteins. It's not because of chloride ions in the cell. It's because of structured water. And if a cell loses its voltage, it's having a very hard time maintaining structured water in the cell. And so that's the energy storage form. If we want to get energy to our body, we have to build structured water, and vice versa. So ATP is still very, very important, because if without that unfolded protein, you don't get enough surface area. Kind of like if you ball up aluminum foil. Right? That's very little surface area. You unball it, you create a lot more surface area. So that's what unfolding protein means. You create a lot more surface area for structured water to form, which means more energy held in the system. And energy is how we create order.
And prevent entropy.
Order is health, and disorder is lack of energy. So
it's loss of it. Yeah, I love that. So for someone who's sitting there going, well, my heart's fine. I'm fine, but I want to future-proof my heart. I want to future-proof my health. I have a feeling I know what you're going to say here, but what are your top 3 actionable strategies that would go beyond generic diet? Because I think by now, if people have been paying attention, we've so moved past diet, right? Like we've kind of given you as many diet recommendations as you're going to get, and they're pretty simple. But what are the top 3 actionable strategies you would say to someone, you would give someone right now to future-proof themselves?
The first 2 are probably, people will probably expect somewhat. The first one is get more infrared light. I mean, if you think about it, all life on this planet, except for humans and our pets, are outside in infrared light all day long. And we're missing out on that stimulus. So that's number 1. Second is set your circadian rhythm, because with the energy you gain from infrared light and grounding and things, you need instructions on what to do with it and how to and hormones are the instructions, and what regulates your hormones is the light through your eye. And so with artificial light at the wrong times of day, we're disrupting that cycle of what hormones are supposed to be signaling to the body. And that it's like you have an orchestra all reading different sheet music, right? That's what's happening. You're not getting the right signals. So all the hormones are being made, but they're just not at the right time. They're not in the right amounts and everything. So set your circadian rhythm, which means syncing your body to the day-night cycle of the sun. Be very conscious about the light exposure, artificial light exposure at the wrong times. And then the third one, which is I'm coming more and more to as more and more I learn, is, I mean, it comes back to energy again. It's resolve stored past trauma. That is huge. Coming up. Yeah. If there's stuck energy in your body, whether it's trauma and it's stored in the body, and there's so many people talking about that, then this comes down to the heart again. Your heart is perceiving that stored energy, because the heart is monitoring your internal environment and your external environment, relaying that information to the brain neurologically and electromagnetically, and your brain is telling your body what to do based on that signaling. So if you've got signaling in your body that's stuck energy, not moving, keeping you in this kind of ramped up state all the time, you're not gonna heal. You can't get into that parasympathetic healing state. You can't get into that deep sleep healing state if that's there. And so that can be a hard thing to do. It can be a hard thing to face. Some of the things you have to face when you're resolving that trauma. But it could be something that, like you said, someone feels fine. And lots of times they don't even know that there's stored trauma, because it's not something that happened to you, or because trauma is not necessarily something traumatic to us. Is not necessarily something that we think, oh, that was traumatic. Yeah. It's basically your body's ability to deal with the trauma at the time it happened. So it could be a super small trauma that was just as traumatic to you than a bigger trauma for somebody else, because of your body's ability to deal with it at the time was impaired. Right. So But there are different therapies, that can help people. Like somatic experiencing is a very good one, or biofield tuning, or things like that can help you identify where these traumas are and move it energetically through your body, because that's what life is all about. And is the movement, the flow of things. Just like, again, the water's flowing all over the planet. We need flow of water in our bodies. We need flow of energy through our bodies. That's what creates health and helps us maintain it long term, is when things are moving. When things get stagnant, it's not good. So those are my top three, I think.
Nice. Yeah, I thought you were going to say, get out and ground, go see morning light, but I like that you kind of took it up a notch from there.
Yeah.
So in light of what you teach, how do you think people should evaluate their healthcare team? Because at the end of the day, everybody's not just going to run around and fire their doctors and say, I'm just going to deal with structured water here. Like
Yeah.
so what are the questions they should ask and the red flags they should kind of look for? Or maybe is there someone they should add to is there something they need to add? Because like you said at the very beginning of the podcast, what conventional medicine is really good at right now is intervening when you need an intervention, right?
Yeah.
When you have an event like you had, there's no amount of structured water in that moment that would have saved you. You needed conventional medicine to step in and save the day so that you could move forward and learn what you've learned and teach what you teach. But so for the rest of us who are listening to this, what are your thoughts in terms of how do we assess our medical team? And maybe are there stopgaps that we can install, or are there things that we can do to add to it or mitigate some of the built-in shortcomings?
Yeah. I think,
or limitations, maybe.
Yeah, I think that it's hard to say because every practitioner is so different, but I think that you want to be working with people that have a philosophy, that it's not just a here, your blood work says this, so take this. Whether it's a medication, whether it's a list of supplements. I'm not saying that supplements are bad or anything. They can definitely help us, but they supplement the lifestyle. They supplement the environment that we create. Mm-hmm. And so I say this a lot to my clients and on podcasts in various places, is that testing doesn't necessarily determine risk, right? It can be helpful in situations. It can help point you in the right direction, but it really can't determine risk. And the perfect example of that is my testing looked pretty good. And guess what happened to me? I know people who has testing looks terrible and they've never had a heart attack, never even had heart disease symptoms. So is this imaging and testing really giving us a picture of what the risk is? What determines risk is your environment and your behaviors, right? Mm-hmm. The signals you give your body day in and day out are way more important than a single intervention here or a single intervention there, right? That's the most important thing. And so you want to make sure that a practitioner that you're working with is also coaching you to change those daily habits and those daily environmental exposures. That's the most important thing. If you're not working with someone who's preaching those things, then that's kind of a red flag for me, that their not that they're a bad person or anything like that, but just that their philosophy is somewhat incomplete. I would say. I wouldn't even say flaw, because I don't like saying that. It's just incomplete.
No, it's just incomplete. And that's what you're saying. You're adding to, right? Yeah. So in the work that you do with people, would you say that work kind of is a great way to accompany what they're already doing? Like nobody's going to go out and fire their primary care physician or their cardiologist necessarily. But I would guess that what you're teaching people in your programs is really helping them to bring back these elements of nature, learn, get that toolkit so that you can improve the structured water in your body, so that you can, with that.
Yeah, your body doesn't want to be sick. So if it's sick, it's just getting the wrong signals. And those signals could be stuck and ingrained, like from past trauma. There could be some deep signals that it's getting. But yeah, it's very focused on bringing people back to the stimuli that express to the body to be safe and healthy, right? And that's, no surprise, the things that nature gives us. That's where we came from. It's what we've kind of divorced ourselves from to an extent. And so, yeah, but the thing that I like to highlight for people is that here's another way to kind of determine a red flag, right, of a practitioner, right? Is if you go to a practitioner and they take things in your blood work or whatever, this testing, or they determine something about you and they say, okay, now you have to do this. You have to do this intervention that I'm giving you, or you have to take this medication or this supplement, whatever, or you're going to die. And they're trying to fear you into doing it. That's a red flag for me, right? Because I want to empower you. I want to tell you why this is happening, and then explain to you when you learn why, you understand the movement going forward. And I want to give you knowledge and habits you need to build a lifestyle for yourself that gives you confidence and gives you control, that's empowering, right? It gives the locus of control in you, rather than you looking outside at the next test, the next therapy, the next protocol out here. Like, where's the solution for me? The solution is here when you understand how the body works.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's a very empowering message. That's what I try and give people when I work with people in my program and things, is that message, because now that takes away their anxiety about this thing they don't understand that's happening to them. And that's I thought I was going to help people with heart disease, but it turns out I'm helping them with their peace of mind about their health. And that's been a cool realization for me to have.
That's pretty cool. So when you wrote Understanding the Heart, you framed cardiovascular disease as in an evolutionary context. Again, guys, read the book. It's a really good book. But if you were writing a sequel, and you said before we started, you said you've got now a whole other book to add to this book. So if you were writing a book on longevity, what would the central message be?
The central message, I mean, I guess from a big
or how does your vision evolved, basically? I mean, because if you've got a whole other book to add to your book, there's been an evolution in your thinking and in how you're looking at this or guiding people.
Yeah, just make it somewhat esoteric. I don't know, but it's the more and more I learn, I'm a very analytical person. I want to understand something. I want the facts and figures and things like that. But I am learning that is never going to give us the complete answers. Knowing all the facts and figures, the latest research, the best design research is never going to give us the complete answers, because I think ancient cultures understood that to an extent, and they kind of surrendered to whatever you want to call God, right? It could be the universe, it could be love, it could be prana, it could be whatever you want to call it, the ether. There's a higher power than ourselves. We're not meant to understand all the complexities of life and our physiology, which means our best bet is to put ourselves in environments that that are more natural or more familiar to our bodies. We came from nature. We are nature, right? We divorce ourselves from that. We see the problems that happen from that, whether it's introducing toxins or frequencies of EMF that aren't compatible with us, whether it's lack of sunlight, whether it's toxic food, whether it's traumas, all these things, right? I mean, at a very core, traumas are going to happen. They're supposed to happen. But when you interfere with the process that your body processing a trauma to get rid of it, releasing it, which is what we call shock. What does medicine do? They suppress shock, which allows trauma to be stored. We're interfering at every single stage of all these things of our body's ability to just be vibrantly healthy. So, and that starts from a young age. So it's you can always start, no matter what's happened to you in your life. You can always start. You can always improve, right? But that's why your childhood is so important, and making proper environments, proper nervous system signal for our children is so important, because that's going to be the nervous system they grow up with. So I guess the main overarching thing, and so I've actually written a third book now called Pain Sense, and I get much more into this idea of cellular physiology and how it's structured, water based, and that kind of stuff, and bigger concepts. But as far as the heart stuff, I could add so much to my heart understanding of the heart book at this point. And I guess an underarching thing would be, we need to stop thinking we know what's best, right? And kind of surrender to this wisdom. Again, it's like this knowing, and Plato talked about it, this gnosis, he called it, this knowing that something is right and doing it because it feels right, not because we analytically know it's right. Because we can think we can know that, and human research is fundamentally flawed because it's designed by humans, and then we can statistically mess with things any way we want to and make it seem a certain way. But we've lost touch with this knowing, which again brings us back to the heart, and that's the organ that we seem to sense this knowing from. We know it in our hearts. We say that not because because we feel that, right? And I think that's the most important aspect of living going forward as far as creating health is leading with your heart, knowing with your heart. And when you understand it from that perspective, and you understand that nature is giving you the answers, you don't need to understand the exact mechanisms. Even though I like to entertain that and look into it and see if I can figure it out, I've come to a point where I don't need to know it. And I think that's been the biggest transformation for me, is where I don't have to know exactly what's going on. I just trust this. Right. And again, that brings you inside, rather than you searching for the thing outside of you. That's the next answer, the next research study, the next practitioner, the next protocol, the next test, whatever it is. Those things aren't going to give us the answer. And that's what people come to me. They come to me with that mentality, like, well, look at this blood work. And then I start talking to them, and then they put it down. Right.
Yeah.
And they're like,
Yeah.
okay. And they give them this confidence going forward. So, without all the little details that kind of back up that theory, that's the overarching thing. And so we need to get back to that. And I think ancient cultures were much more in contact with that, which I ultimately think is what allowed them to do things like build the pyramids and things like that. They knew more about that stuff.
Yeah. And I think that, what you've been talking about all along, which, and we see this in all of this whole biohacking longevity space. If you really look at what all these technologies are trying to do, and I mean, I've got a little red infrared light panel on my desk that I keep on a lot of the day because I'm sitting here, in front of a blue light screen and the whole 9 yards. I think continually we are trying to redeliver nature to the body because we've become so distanced from it. Yeah. Grounding sheets on your bed, red and near infrared light, helping people to get out into nature. We know that children who are in schools where they go to parks and they play outside and they get in the dirt, they do better. Their nervous system is better regulated. So, and because when you do that and when you re-energize the system through access to energized water, for example, so that your body can you're letting the body take care of the rest. And that feeds into what you're talking about is you don't need to know all the answers, because if you give the body what it needs and remove what it doesn't, those obstacles we're putting in, it will take care of itself. And that's such a powerful message, right? Because there is an element of surrender to that. And we're not sitting here saying if somebody has, advanced chronic heart disease, just forget your doctor and go stand in the forest all day. That's not the point. But certainly from a lifestyle perspective and preventing and living a healthier life, this could put you in a place where hopefully you don't end up going there.
Yeah. And that's the perfectly said. Like it does take this level of surrender, right? Which means giving up control a little bit, which is hard for us to do, hard for a lot of people to do. And when you do that, though, it's very freeing. And you just kind of put your trust in this higher power that is whatever you want to call it, right?
Yeah.
You could say that it's nature, right? But at the same time, it's also well said that you said let's use Western medicine. You can kind of keep it there to monitor you, but there are certain situations where people get to a point where it becomes a negative experience to go there because it's so frustrating for them. And then is it really helping you? And so we have to kind of weigh those opinions, and that's a personal decision. I can't tell you there's a right or wrong thing to do there, but use that. And then also, go stand in the woods all day long, if you can, or try and recreate that environment as best you can. And that's what we're trying to do. Like you said, with these biohacking things, you have this red light. Why? Because it's creating a little bit more balance of an environment than looking at blue light all day. You're getting some red in it. Ideally, you'd be in full spectrum sunlight all day, but if that's not possible, let's make it a little bit better and add some red light, right? Those are the things we make. We can't go stand on the earth all day long. If grounding sheets are a reality for you and you don't have dirty electricity, or you filtered that out, this makes sense. Yeah, this is something that helps us get closer while in the confines of our modern way of life. Because nobody's saying you have to go live in the woods. If you can, you want to, more power to you, but we don't have to, right? We can do the best we can in our modern way of life. And that's the name of the game. And I've proven to myself the impact that can have, on someone. So yeah.
Here we are. All right. A couple quick fire questions and I will let you go. What is one belief about heart health that you're still personally exploring? Something where the science is emerging and you're still connecting the dots. Is there one thing in particular that stands out to you? Probably there's a bunch, but is there one you can share?
That I'm still exploring.
Something that's emerging. Yeah.
All aspects, I think. Man, I guess I'm always exploring this whole lipid thing just because it's so prominent. It's what everybody talks about. And there's all this new literature. And the only reason I'm still exploring it is because they keep harping on the same things. We keep trying to study the same things. And so to me, it's just providing more and more evidence of why it's a big distraction. It doesn't make sense to me that we're trying to blame a whole disease process on one molecule when it's very, very complex. There's lots of different aspects to it, but I'm always paying attention to that, mostly just because it's what everybody likes to talk about. And so
Well, it's getting blamed for a lot, right? So it's cholesterol as being it's central, and so I think it needs to be unpacked. Like it just needs to be unpacked.
Yeah.
Okay, if you could leave our listeners with one message, to carry into their movement, light exposure, stress management, and nutrition routines, what would it be?
I guess similar to what we've talked about, it's just that surrender, like surrender to those things. Like it let go a little bit, which the ability to let go is an incredibly powerful thing. Let go of the control and put your trust, faith, whatever you want to call it, into the things that make us healthy, like the signals that make us healthy. Like you can look at all the research in the world, it's all leading you back to that, go to those natural environments. So yeah, it's a work on that. Like if you find you can't do that, you can't let go, you can't surrender to that means there's some personal work that needs to be done.
Yeah. And I think the trauma work's really important. However,
definitely.
I will tell you this and share with the audience. I recorded and released a podcast earlier this year with a doctor of osteopathy who started off as an orthopedic surgeon. His name is Tudor Marinescu in Sedona, and he does really interesting work with neural therapy in releasing points of trauma in the body. And it is incredible. I take people there for retreats a couple times a year, and some of the people I've taken have had such massive shifts. It's on the table. It's pretty powerful stuff.
Yeah, very powerful. Very important.
We're not going to talk about that now. I'll flip you the episode if you're interested. Now, beyond your books and clinical work, what legacy do you hope to create in the field of cardiovascular health and longevity? It's your last question.
I guess I've said this to other people before. My big goal is to change the conversation about heart disease, which is the theme we're talking about. I think it needs to come away from diet and cholesterol being the prominent thing we talk about and way people try and control it to these other things that I've talked about. I want to change that conversation. I want to shift it. Whether it happens in medicine or not, I don't care. General conventional wisdom, I want to help shift that narrative. Yeah.
I love it. This has been as interesting and fascinating a conversation as I was hoping it would be. We've been to places I didn't know we were going, but Stephen, it's been fantastic. Thank you so much for taking the time and for being here. Why don't we, as a parting gift, share with people how to reach you, how to work with you, where to find you, and when your next book is coming out.
Sure. My website is resourceyourhealth.com. So most everything that people want to find is on there, like how to work with me, my books, different things. The very infrequent blog that I post, that's on there as well. I'm also on social media, just Dr. Stephen Hussey, Dr. Stephen Hussey. People can reach out there as well. And I'm posting stuff that I like, new stuff that I find that I want to talk about and things. But yeah, those are the main ways people can contact me and find me.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This has been amazing. Thanks again.
Thank you.